An example of a Student Voices project. At Elon, we've done a lot of work with student-faculty teams working together to redesign courses. One of the first ones of these we did involved 2 education faculty who were working on a course that a number of faculty had tried to teach and always struggled. The students wanted the course to be something other than what it was. The faculty didn't see other ways of sort of approaching the course that would get towards the goals that they had for the course and the students had for the course. We had a team of 2 faculty, 7 students, and a person from the teaching center who worked together for about 8 weeks to redesign the course. And we started by thinking big about what the goals of the course were, and the faculty described what the goals were that were required for the course. And then the students and the faculty together worked to rephrase those goals. So they weren't changing the nature of the course at all, weren't changing the nature of the goals. They were just trying to articulate them in different ways and trying to see if there were ways that better resonated with the students. After the team worked through articulating the goals, the next step they took was working on texts, trying to decide what would be the core texts for this class. That was something that the students often had commented in the past, that the books just weren't helpful. They didn't meet what the students thought they needed from this course. And so what the faculty did is they came up with a list of around 25 texts that would be suitable as core books in this course and gave them to the students. And so the students took about a month. They all went home over a break, and each student brought 4 or so books with him or her. And they read the books and against a rubric that the students and the faculty had created about which books would be useful in the course. And then after the break, they got back together and the students started nominating books for inclusion in the course or taking books off the list. And the conversation about books was really empowering for students. They were surprised when the faculty members just let them take books off the list, including books that had been used as the core text in that class in the recent past.
One project where I involved students in my scholarship was when I decided to redesign one of the courses that I taught with my students' help. This was a couple of years ago, and this was for Spanish 322, then Advanced Composition. Now it's called Art of Written Communication. And this is a course that all our majors and all our minors are supposed to take. And first very intensive writing course in a foreign language. And I've started with having lots of difficulties with the course, but then I worked on it a lot and I redesigned it using more contemporary pedagogical methods, particularly, with a lot of emphasis on editing, students working on their papers, editing or turning in several drafts, as well as peer collaboration. I also incorporated a lot of content so that the course would be content-driven, and I eliminated kind of direct grammar instruction as well as exercises, filling the blanks or finishing the sentences and stuff like that, and did a more individualized, had a more individualized approach to teaching grammar. So once I redesigned the course, I still wanted to hear from students and collaborate some more with the students, so I invited 3 of my former students that had taken the course before to redesign the syllabus, as well as they maybe suggest a textbook for it. We collaborated for about 1 semester. We met several times and they had specific tasks that each time they had to complete. We worked on course goals and objectives, also course assignments, and then after that we worked on the selection of a textbook.
So it'll start with, okay, you took this ethical practice class, for example. We did these 8 things. Let's talk about let's talk about what you and your classmates found particularly rich and rewarding. What were some of the struggles you had? So it's to unlock some of the threshold concepts and bottlenecks for student learning, but also, and I think this is one of the most important parts of the ISSOTL work with students, is you learn a lot about the habits and practices that they bring that you might not know about otherwise. So what is it that they're doing when they're doing homework? What are they, where are they situated? What are they paying attention to? How do they respond to the homework outside of the particular questions that you might ask as a response question due the next day? And so I think you learn a tremendous amount by doing this, both about the students that you're working with, about students generally, but also about what you're doing. And in some ways, you're learning about yourself. Like I learned all sorts of things about my own habits and what I find comfortable and less comfortable in relation to what students find comfortable and less comfortable.
SURE is an acronym, and it stands for Summer Undergraduate Research Experience. And basically, it's a 2-month experience where you have a concentrated amount of time to work with a faculty member on a research project that you both have chosen to look further into. And toward the end of the SURE program, you are able to present your research, and you may not be completely done, but you are able to present what you have found so far. So it really gives students an opportunity to connect with faculty members, but also take charge of a research project and look further into things that interest them. Working with Dr. Coker, how I got involved was, I worked with him last year, just helping him with some tasks he needed done for the General Studies program, and he approached me about possibly doing a SURE experience because we had been looking into the 5 Elon experiences, but just how they relate to other schools and how students are involved with them in other schools. So he just approached me and asked me if it was something I would be interested in, and I actually didn't really know too many details about the SURE program, but I trusted him that if he was bringing this opportunity to me, then it's something I need to look into. So I definitely just went ahead and jumped right in head first, and we started working on the proposal and got things submitted in December, and to my surprise, it was accepted. So after that, things just kind of spiraled, and we started working with students and conducting interviews. And interestingly enough, students responded well to the research because we were examining the 5 Elon experiences and how they related to seniors and their experiences, and it just really gave them a chance to kind of reflect on what they did their 4 years here at Elon. So I was very happy that students found it very beneficial to them, and thus were more willing to engage and help us with our research, so that was great. Well, we are looking into the 5 Elon experiences, and those are basically 5 forms of experiential learning. Students are required to complete at least one before they graduate. Study abroad, service learning, internship, research, and leadership. So we're looking into the 5 experiences and how students relate to those 5 experiences, why they chose to do what experiences they chose to do, how their participation led to changes in their future plans or if not, how they feel like they benefited from their participation. Just basically asking students about their relationship with the 5 experiences and whether or not they find them beneficial. There were a lot of unanswered questions, which sounds odd because it was a research project and the intent was to answer one of 3 questions that we developed, but the further we looked into things, there were a lot of unanswered questions in regards to the minority experience and how minorities relate to the 5 Elon experiences and what motivates their choices, and also looking into freshman perceptions of the 5 Elon experiences because our research project, we dealt mostly with seniors, so we were listening to seniors and their perceptions of the experiences prior to completing them and then their perceptions after completing them. So I would really like to speak with a student that hasn't had a chance to complete any of them and see what they perceive they could benefit from each experience. I think that would be really interesting, and also understand how minority students are able to connect with the 5 different experiences. So those are 2 questions right at the top that just came right out of the research after we started looking into some of the student responses. I started to notice that there were a few things that we just weren't able to stab into, granted with the size and the amount of students that we were able to connect with in this research study that we conducted this summer.
So we both studied teaching and learning about human rights, and then we did more general teaching and learning material, and it ended up leading to the 3 of us co-teaching a class about human rights stuff. So I would say that's kind of the most intense and in that way and most fun and most rich experience I've had interacting with students and partnering with them around SSOTL. What we really wanted to do was create a class where the content and the teaching went hand in hand, so where the teaching methods were appropriate to the kind of questions we were asking in the class. So the kinds of questions we were asking as SSOTL practitioners and researchers were, what kinds of pedagogies are particularly appropriate to questions around justice and human rights, and how do we enact that as a faculty member and two students. The two students had a lot more on-the-ground experience as advocates and activists in human rights stuff, and I had more of the theoretical, traditional academic stuff, and so it was a mix and a blend, and how do we do all of that in a way that was appropriate to the particular questions the class was about.
Actually, when I started to look at what I've done over the last 15 years, it almost always includes students. But I think part of that is it's part of my undergraduate research scaffolding, you know, the mentoring that I do. My field, one of my fields that I study is teaching and learning and student development. So I've done a number of projects with students, both primarily dreamed up by me, and then they participate as research participants, or for their own project. So, for example, I had a student in my classroom, in an educational psychology classroom, and she acted as a TA to the students. But she collected their work, she interviewed a number of them, we did a pre-post test on epistemological development, and then she didn't give me any of the materials until after the semester was over. And then we did some analysis on their students' ways of knowing and how they interacted with the course material. So that was a student project. She went on, she's now a professor of educational psychology herself, so apparently it was pretty effective. I've done some course design with students, but mostly I use more of a research framework for my work with students.
The students didn't determine all of the details of the course, but they made suggestions and they outlined and they sort of negotiated with the faculty, and they ended up producing a new syllabus for the course. To make this a SSOTL project and not just an interesting student voices project, we did a series of interviews with the faculty and the students participating before the course design process, immediately after, and then immediately after the course had been taught. And we also interviewed the students who were in the revised course to see what kinds of outcomes there were. The biggest outcomes, interestingly, weren't experienced by the students in the revised course. They tended to like the fact that the course had been redesigned with student involvement, but they still had the kinds of concerns students tend to have about the course. Different than in the past. They were more positive than students had been in the past, but there were still some issues with the course. Where the change really came is both in the students and the faculty who participated in the redesign team. The faculty talked about having a totally different understanding of who their students were and what their students wanted from the courses, and sort of student motivation and student interest in this course and more broadly. And one of those faculty members, a long-time Elon faculty member. The other was relatively new, but it wasn't like they hadn't been teaching for a while. They just re-understood or re-saw teaching through students' eyes, and they found that very empowering. The students talked a lot about how different they felt as students after this. They felt more empowered as students. They felt like they should be thinking more about what their goals were for a course and what they were trying to do and why their work in the course was purposeful. But they also talked about having a lot more empathy for faculty. They were surprised at how hard faculty worked to teach. And a number of them said in the interviews that when something wasn't seeming to work in a class, they would always sort of cut the faculty member a little slack and say, what's really happening and what's the goal? Because surely there must be a goal here. So in the end, the course was a bit better. The faculty and the students who participated in the design team were quite different in how they were as students and as faculty. And those were some of the outcomes we saw from that one course design team. We've now done dozens of them across campus.
Mentoring undergraduate research takes a lot of hands-on work. I think that most of what students learn and gain from that experience come from one-on-one and small group meetings. So I make sure to meet with my students regularly, to really make it a priority, to not cancel that meeting, and to have every meeting require a particular task be carried out by each person there. I like to work in kind of mixed level groups where we have some more experienced students and some less, and so everyone can learn from each other. I think a really important thing with regard to ISSOTL work is to recruit your students carefully. In most of my classes, I project that I'm very interested in how different kinds of pedagogies work. So I'll often ask them to step back and say, okay, now we just did this in this kind of a format. What do you think the advantages and disadvantages? How might we do it differently next time? And so those students who find those questions interesting tend to be the ones that are interested in doing a ISSOTL research project. Making sure that they have some background, good background work. I always have them do some readings, some literature search of their own. And then I think it's really important to always have a product at the end. It doesn't need to be a publication or even a poster, but something that everyone can take some credit for and be proud of, I think is important. I think a lot of opportunities for reflection are important for the learning for all of us. You know, what surprised you there? What weren't you expecting? What do you still want to know about? What aha moment did you just have? And let's not treat it as something trivial, but let's really look at why that surprised you or why you understood something in a new way. Because that, for me, is really the benefit of any ISSOTL work. It's not to necessarily change how you teach or how your students learn, but how you think about teaching and learning. So you need opportunities for those reflections.
Make it very clear from the beginning that you're not doing this because you have no idea what you're doing, but rather that because you have invested a lot of time and thinking into this, and you know so much, really, that you are a good teacher or educator, that you're giving students this opportunity. Because it's not very clear to students why this is done. But then, on the other hand, also, another tip that I would like to give is to be prepared to change things. And also to say, well, I accept certain changes, but would not accept others.
I think there's often the idea that when you start with this kind of partnership, that as a faculty member, I don't want to say stop being critical, but you give up your voice as well by inviting students, and I don't think that's the best way that it works. I think the best way that it works is that you include student voices, but even as students say, oh, I think you should do this, or I think you should try this, or here's what the research says, I still need to use my judgment about that in order to get the most out of what it is that I've learned.
Bringing students into these questions, into these inquiries, always deepen the inquiry, because I have a bad habit of only studying something until I understand it. And students always have different questions that they want to try and understand. So it broadens and deepens the projects that way. And I think a student perspective is a very important alternative perspective. I've been teaching for 25 years, and I don't always remember what it feels like to be a student. Allison Cook-Sather's recent article about student involvement as a threshold concept, I think it really kind of captures it. They're not just a voice, but they're also eyes and ears and, you know, a sentient being who's contributing all of their senses to what's going on in the classroom. And I think that is vastly important.
It's easy to start small with one student looking at a small piece of one class, so it need not, I think there's a tendency to think that it's got to be this big project with lots of folks. And it can be just this small at least at Elon, 2-credit undergraduate research on one particular element of class. So students, I had worked with a student on how I give feedback and in what ways that feedback gets taken up. Not a big, huge project. Took one semester, 2 hours, and I learned a lot about what it is that students do with the feedback that I give and how I could give better feedback. So one thing I would say is you can start small.
I would say definitely work hard to build relationships with your faculty members, even if you just have a class with them. I would say definitely work hard and get to know them, and because you never know what they're going to approach you with. You never know what opportunities come across their desk and they may think of your name first. So definitely get to know your the faculty members you're working with, and build a personal relationship. You know, you definitely want to give them enough background about you so that they understand where you're coming from and what your interests are. So if there are opportunities that come across their desk, they can think about you first.
I think it's those students who take an interest in what you're doing, what your job is. That's, I think, the ones that you want to recruit into your ISSOTL project. Not just who see college as more than just about them, but understand that I have many roles at the college, that there are other things that the institution is doing. I teach a senior seminar in psychology on the transition to adulthood, and my students are very often surprised to hear that some of the things we do at Elon are done very deliberately. The way we have our first year courses, the way we have, sophomore transitions projects, the way we have our capstone courses. They learn in that course that these are implemented by the institution because of prior research on how to make students succeed in college. And then they become kind of fascinated by how that research happens. So I think sharing some of that research with them and letting them know that things at Elon were done deliberately for specific purposes, and they can see that, they've experienced that for themselves. That is a way to pull them into an interest in ISSOTL work.
I've had some students say, there's this thing going on in your class and I'm really interested in, and I'd like to understand it better, or I have questions. I had one student who, I was teaching close reading, and he couldn't, even after the class, he got pretty far, but didn't feel as comfortable with it as he might. So he kept asking, well, but how do you, I would say, what you need to do is you need to find the juicy parts of the text. You need to find the part that's really complicated or difficult, and then that's often a really important place to spend your time and energy. And he was struggling with the where to spend the time and energy. And so we kept having this conversation, okay, but where in this text, like where's the juicy part? Where's the juicy part? What am I doing here? And ultimately he said, okay, let's try this from the other side. Let's look at this as like how would you teach this to someone, and how would you pass this on, and in what ways have I been successful or not successful in doing that? And that led to a research project on exegetical reading. But for the most part, it's students, if I have something in mind about a class, question that I have, or just wanting to improve a class that I have, I'll ask students, and what I have tried to do, and I've been unsuccessful doing it, is I try to ask a range of students who have been both some that have been very successful in the class and others who have been significantly less successful in the class, because I'd really like to learn from the students who aren't connected, aren't engaged, aren't as successful in the class, what it is that's not connecting with them or engaging them, or in what ways they're struggling.
You really have to respect your students. You have to not treat them as teaching assistants or research assistants. That you have to understand that though they have less experience than you do, they have a lot of great ideas. I've had classes that were transformed by student ideas. So you have to, like with everything else, you have to let go of thinking about what a student's limitations are and think rather what their potential is.
I have become a teacher who is much more dependent, I guess, on our students, because I'm asking them for their opinion about different kinds of projects more often.
There are some distinct things about Elon that encourage this sort of student voice work. I mean, we have relatively small classes and strong student-faculty relationships across campus. So that makes it easier to do the work. We also have a fairly experimental culture, which allows people to try different things and feel rewarded and supported in trying those things. But the more work like this I've done, and the more I've talked to people around the country and the world about it, the less I think it's distinct to us. Faculty who are really interested in teaching, students are curious about learning and wanting to think about how the world of a university really works. And so lots of different faculty and lots of different students can do this. You don't have to be in a distinct culture, or you don't have to be at a place that already highly values this kind of work to give it a try.